Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Performance Cafe. Well, we're not procrastinating today. Unlike the current series that we're running, we are taking a look at procrastination and understanding a little bit more about it. What does it look like? What causes it? And how can we help people who suffer from procrastination? And I think there's something to be said for the level of procrastination, because I think sometimes all of us have something that we procrastinate about. And I think what we're talking about here is when there's someone who is really battling in general, with huge amounts of procrastination. Right. So there are three factors that contribute to procrastination in general. And I think a lot of people very easily just chalk this up to laziness, whatever that may mean. In the research, though, it shows that there are three different forms of procrastination. The first factor is the psychological. Now, psychological factors refer to like the internal workings and processes, the beliefs, the emotions, the attitudes that influence our behavior. So, for example, if I am raised to believe in a particular superstition in my home, going against that superstition, even if I know it's a superstition, is kind of tough, right? And so it's that internal process that is driving me. When we find psychological factors in procrastination, then we find that they're often very deeply rooted within an individual's psyche, and they shape how they perceive themselves, their abilities, and the world around them, right? It's based in this person's view of not just themselves, but of their worldview. Now, how do we know when something that's coming out as procrastination, that it's got a psychological factor to it? The first, and the one I think we see so much of, is a fear of failure. And sometimes the fear of failure doesn't look like, oh, I'm scared to fail. It's just like, I'm not even starting. But I'm not starting because I'm scared I'm not going to know how to do this. And interestingly enough, the only way that subconsciously people can sort of secure this, safeguard themselves from this fear of failure is just not to start. Because if I never start, no one can ever say I failed. So I'd rather not do than fail. Another way that we see it is in perfectionism. So, for example, if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not going to do it. If I start working as a project manager, if I cannot be the all-round perfect best project manager ever, I'm not going to do it. The problem with both fear of failure and perfectionism is that they do lead to a lack of initiating to start off with, because I might fail, I might not do it perfectly. The problem with this is that unless we do things and fail or don't do them perfectly, we don't actually learn. Because in our comfort zone, where we make no mistakes, there's actually no place for growth. There's also a lack of motivation. So when I psychologically am not committed to something, I cannot be motivated. And often I've found that it's got a lot to do with identity. So, for example, let's go back to what I'm on about this year, and that is New Year's resolutions. And someone will go, I'm going to go to the gym every week this year. And then they do for the first 3 months, and then they don't. And the reason for that is because of a lack of a motivation. But that lack of motivation can also come from their lack of identity as someone who goes to the gym. So people who go to the gym and know their way around the gym don't ever go, well, I'm not going to go because I don't know what to do. But if I'm not someone who identifies as someone who's always physically fit, who knows how all the gym apparatus works, who knows where the best gym classes are, well, if I don't have that identity, I've got nothing to support me. So now I'm going to go in there. I'm going to look really bad in my gym clothes because I feel fat. I walk in, I feel inept because I don't know how the machines work. I feel like I'm being stared at by all these other people with their beautiful bodies. So it's a matter of identity, where if I say I am that person who goes to gym, then I am that person who's going to learn how the gym equipment works. I am going to learn where the best classes are. And so that motivation can be very deeply seated in our identity. It leads me to the next point as well. a low self-confidence is one of the big psychological factors around procrastination. Because if I don't believe I can do it and I can do it well, then I'm just not going to do it, am I? And who would want to? Let's say someone said that you had to stand on top of one of those horses, like in the circus, and do tricks on its back. You're not going to jump up there and go, well, I'm going to go and do this perfectly, unless you're pretty confident and you've trained and you've worked your way up to being able to do that. Therefore, our instinct, our nature is to survive. And therefore, we're not going to do things if we feel that we have no self-confidence in it. Unfortunately, again, unless we don't start somewhere, we're not going to learn how to do it, which, of course, then will breed self-confidence. Avoidance of discomfort is another factor. So I don't want to speak in public in front of my classmates or in front of my peer group because I'm scared they laugh at me because I don't speak well. You see how, again, it's about me. It's about my psychology and my beliefs about what makes me valuable to others or not. If you were raised that someone who is a good speaker is more important than people who prefer to be more introverted and quiet, well, then not being able to speak in public is a fairly big thing. When actually we know that 90% of people just about hate speaking in public, and therefore the exact opposite should be true. Right? So all of these stem from individual beliefs, maybe past experiences that have gone wrong, and where there wasn't a growth mindset applied to be able to help the person move forward or to learn from this experience. And then, of course, that would result in an emotional response to a task or a situation. And that might even include the emotional responses of people around us. So that when we are judged, when we don't have a loved one to turn to say, I just did this and I messed up, and they go, that's okay, you'll do it better next time around. That plays into it quite heavily. And the impact, that is significant, because you see, the individual's behavior is so seated and their decision-making processes are so seated in their sense of self that this will play a central role in driving procrastination and other behaviors. And the lack of the ability to move and change those processes, those beliefs, means that this person will be caught in the cycle of procrastination for a very long time, if not for always. So that's psychological factors. Next up, let's take a look at cognitive factors. Now, cognitive factors involve the mental processes and the strategies individuals use to perceive, to interpret, and to respond to tasks and situations. So these factors are related to how they think, they reason, they plan, and they problem solve, right? This is the kind of trouble if psychological factors come from the heart, cognitive factors come from the brain. Let's take a look at a couple of examples. So, task difficulty. If someone feels like the task that they have to do is excessively difficult or beyond their abilities, they're probably going to procrastinate. They're probably going to stop and try and slow things down. Poor time management, that is definitely a cognitive factor, because I can be taught how to manage time. I can be taught how to do this better. But if people cannot manage their time, they cannot plan. If they cannot plan, then they cannot stretch even difficult tasks over a long enough period to give themselves time to research, to look into it, to grow their skills slowly. And therefore, their poor time management, on top of task difficulty, for example, can really lead to great procrastination. We spoke a little bit about distractions earlier in the previous episode as well. And these intellectual distractions also add to cognitive, or also one of the cognitive factors that hold back people, because what happens is, instead of applying themselves to a task and just knuckling down and getting through it, as my teachers would say, instead they get distracted by social media, by going down a rabbit hole of over preparation, by maybe asking a lot of people their input in order to make themselves feel more secure. But then that takes so much time, and they get so distracted by everything that everyone's adding, that they actually don't ever go over to completing the task either. And remember, a partially completed task is as much an indicator of procrastination as a task that was never started. Right? And then, of course, instant gratification. Instant gratification is so interesting from the perspective of it wants to be, I want to be gratified now. I want to be happy now. I want to do it now. And so what happens is everything that can't just happen now, everything that can't be completed now, everything that can't be done right now becomes a burden. And added to the need for instant gratification is sometimes if people cannot instantly do what they want to, then they get bored by the time they are supposed to be working on this thing. And therefore, there's another failure because something doesn't get started or doesn't get finished. So this is all about how people process information, how they allocate their attention, how they focus, how they make decisions about task management and how to complete a task. And the impact is that the cognitive quality of what they are delivering is actually poor. The productivity is poor. And so that means that it's a poor product delivered poorly and potentially not delivered entirely. And so from that perspective, you can see how this would slow down and cause procrastination. Last but not least, we've got environmental factors. Now, environmental factors are external conditions, contexts, or circumstances that are going to impact the way that individuals behave and how they can do whatever it is that they need to do. So these factors exist outside of the individual and they can be very situationally driven, and they may actually to some point also be outside of the control of the individual. But sometimes they're not. So for example, a lack of structure on how to do. Earlier, I spoke about not having proper time management, not breaking up tasks into chunks so that there's a flow of getting things done in order to complete a task. That lack of structure may be environmental, right? It could be, I work in an environment where the management is slightly lax, and therefore there's not a lot of deadlines and structure given. And because of that, tasks fall by the wayside. But it can equally be because that individual has never been taught how to create structure for themselves. The same with accountability. It could be because, well, no one's going to hold me accountable, so there's no real deadline, so I can just do it whenever. But actually, it's just because that person also hasn't been taught about personal accountability. When they're really external, when these factors are really externally focused, we see things like ambiguous deadlines. So I kind of need it by Thursday, so just let me know, if you're done by then. An absence of a clear goal. So I thought we could write an article on XYZ, but let me know what you think about it. Or a lack of external pressure or support mechanisms to keep individuals on track. So go off, write that and get back to me in 6 or 8 weeks, with no checkup, no follow-up in between. That's definitely going to open the door to procrastination. Now, the impact of this is that these environmental factors shape the context within which individuals operate, and they cannot action these tasks efficiently, but it'll create a condition that's going to promote procrastination. It's going to discourage work. It's going to discourage productivity and progress and other behaviors. So in summary, a whole bunch of these factors interplay. So someone might not just have an environmental or just a cognitive or just a psychological factor that impacts them. So if we take a look at last week's episode and we compare it with, and we take a look at today's, it's about seeing from last week's episode, what behavior am I seeing being displayed? And then from today's episode to take a look and say, right, so does this, does it have an environmental cause? Does it have a cognitive cause? Does it have a psychological cause? And in that way, have a discussion with the individual who is procrastinating to see, do they see this? Are they self-aware enough to see how this is working and how this procrastination is impacting them and maybe themselves, the team, the business? And then to sit with them and say, right, if we understand that this is how it's playing out, what are the strategies and the mindset shifts, what are the strategies and the mindset shifts to overcome underlying challenges, barriers, and to create more effective approaches to task management? So I hope you found this interesting and informative, and I am excited to hear from any of you if you have done these 2 exercises, and if you've even for yourself or someone else identified the procrastination behavior and the factor driving it. Like to see if you've been able to bring those 2 together. So feel free to reach out to us on all of our channels. As always, we would love to hear from you if you've got any questions, concerns, queries, or comments on this, and you can reach out to us on any of our social media channels. Please remember that these articles, these videos are also converted into blog posts that you can find on perform4.com. And then until I see you next week, where we start talking about how do we help people to resolve the need to procrastinate. I'll see you next week at the Performance Cafe. Goodbye.